Welcome in and welcome back to another episode of the Under the Dome podcast. I am your host, Ben Belden. Thanks for joining me this evening in what is my first live stream in quite some time. So really right now, I got to get this out really at the top. I'm going to kind of ramble here at the beginning as we kind of wait for people to join in, but hopefully this live stream works. Right now, I'm just praying that the internet holds up and that the stream isn't interrupted and all of that. If by some chance you get kicked off or whatever the situation is, or we have technical difficulties, the audio version of this podcast will obviously be available tomorrow, late tonight. But this is the goal. This is what we're trying to do in terms of, having this podcast live as often as possible. Hopefully, like I say, I'm going to learn something throughout the course of this podcast. Meaning this is the first I've really done this in quite some time. I'm sure there's going to be something that I forget to do, that I mess up, or whatever the situation might be. So, I'm going to get the kinks out, and hopefully this live stream podcast is something that, we can do from time to time. And like I say, have some good interactions. So all that out of the way, I'm Ben Belden. I'm your host. You can find me on Twitter if you're watching on YouTube or Periscope or on Facebook. You can see my Twitter handle on there. It's at RealBBelden. You can tweet me there, BELDEN on the last name. Make sure you're following the podcast on all your socials, particularly Instagram. We do a really good job over there of having some cool graphics, especially when commitments come through and that type of stuff. There's Facebook, facebook.com/GoldDomeDaily. On Twitter, you can follow the podcast at Under the Dome Pod. And of course, find us on YouTube, type in Under the Dome Podcast. And if all you want is the audio version, because it's easier for you to tune in, as you drive to work or whatever the situation might be, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever, whenever, whatever you use, we're there. And if not, tell me and I'll get us there. So, like I say, trying to do this show today. We'll see how this works. We've got a couple people watching live now, so thanks to you guys. If you find this later, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, get those notifications so that you know when we go live. I see in the chat already we have all he said was Benjamin, but hi, Nathan. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you. Looking for, some of your sites as we go through this show here a little bit. So last little disclaimer that I want to make before before I really get going here is that probably the worst part about doing one of these live streams is monitoring the comments and reading a comment as you're trying to speak. So I'm going to actually make an effort to not do that and not lose my train of thought too many times. But like I say, bear with me. So if it's been a while since you've commented, stick around for a second. I'm going to be checking them frequently. I'm just going to minimize them on my screen so I don't have to worry about them. So if you're just joining in, you're watching the Under the Dome podcast show, and let's get into it. There's a lot of things that we need to talk about in terms of Notre Dame football starting fall camp. Well, I guess they started a while ago, but fall camp is in full swing, I guess I should say. The media got to watch a couple of practices at this point, so we've got a little bit of a better idea of the types of things that are going on. Although, I guess you could still sort of say not a great idea of what's going on at this point. So before we get into this, I wanted to make this shameless little plug and also kind of correct something from last week's podcast. So if you listened to last week's show, or even if you didn't, the background information that you have to know, I was talking about Peacock and how, people were all upset that Peacock is broadcasting the first Notre Dame home game, although I kept saying it was the first Notre Dame game on September 4th. First of all, Notre Dame doesn't play September 4th. They play September 5th. And the Peacock game that I was referencing was actually September 11th. And I just made that mistake the entire way through the podcast while I was talking about Peacock and those types of things. And, to that I say, I had a blonde moment. I'm sorry. We can't all be perfect. That really wasn't the point of what I was talking about. I was just talking about how Peacock wasn't a big deal. So it's not like I was, I know that Notre Dame plays the Sunday Labor Day in Tallahassee against Florida State, I promise. But that gives me kind of a nice little segue to kind of play this voicemail. So if you're unfamiliar with this, so am I, first of all. But if you want to hear your voice here on the Under the Dome podcast, if you hear something that I say that you either agree with, disagree with, you have a different view on, whatever, leave me a voicemail. You can find that voicemail link. I'll put it in the description for the audio listeners and on YouTube as well. But basically, the bottom line is that you can go into the anchor part, click leave a voicemail, and and leave me a voicemail just like this gentleman did. He didn't identify himself. I assume he's all right that I used this voicemail, but hopefully this works and you'll be able to hear me. But this is, kind of a nice little example.
Hey, Ben, just listening to the podcast today. Just wanted to put one or two small things. First of all, season opener is September 4th, but it's at Florida State.
September 5th.
Second of all, the home opener is September 11th against Toledo. So love your cast, love your Twitter, love the information, but help a brother out and let's all get on the same page. Thanks.
So hopefully you could hear that. I should, somebody, if you could hear that, tell me you could hear that. But so obviously that particular individual, had a, kind of low key roasted me there. And like I say, I know I goofed. Okay. So in the event that I goof at some other point, feel free to tune in, to leave me a voicemail just like that. At some point here on the screen, I'm going to be putting a call-in number for you to leave a voicemail, whether it's for this show or one in the future. Like I say, if I don't get to your voicemail in a show, I can bring it up in the next one. Like I say, the goal is to do this fairly often. I don't have a set day yet. Probably not going to be doing post-game type of stuff. I just like to, enjoy my post-game and that type of stuff. But we do plan on going live quite a bit. And so, again, like I say, we're thankful to the live listeners that are in right now. And hopefully as we do this more often, we become more consistent with it. It becomes a more regular thing. So to Notre Dame things more specifically, lots have happened since we last spoke. I talked on the previous podcast about the commitment of Tobias Merriweather, how that was a big one for Notre Dame. Because it was, obviously a position of need, a position where, especially after this year, we're going to be thin at that position going forward, in a position that, you hope that, that Notre Dame hasn't had the greatest success with, I guess, in the recent years, whether it be due to injuries, guys not living up to their potential, recruiting misses, transfers, all of those things. The bottom line is that, the receiver position, while it hasn't been dreadful, certainly hasn't probably been exactly what Notre Dame fans and Notre Dame coaching staff would hope it would be. When you think back to, the heyday of Notre Dame wide receivers of Maurice Stovall and Michael Floyd and Rima McKnight. I'm naming guys from all different types of eras. Arnaz Battle, Jeff Samardzija, you get the point. Golden Tate. Okay. So, Will Fuller. Okay. I'm done. But, Notre Dame hasn't hit on a lot of receivers, at least in the last couple of years. Obviously, we've had Chase Claypool, we've had Miles Boykin, and if you follow on Twitter, I've kind of made the point. It would be nice if Notre Dame would develop receivers, get them in year one, get them a few snaps here and there, and then get them onto the field quite a bit their sophomore year so that they can develop, so that they get more than 1 year, the way that they got 1 year out of guys like Miles Boykin, like Chase Claypool, like they're hoping to get out of Kevin Austin this year. It's really important, in my opinion, that Notre Dame, really this is the group that Notre Dame really bolster going forward to help them take that next step. And that's really what I talk about mostly on this podcast is how does Notre Dame take the next step as a program? We've well established where we are, where Notre Dame is as a program. How do they become the next, I don't want to say the next Alabama, but how do you prevent the rebuilding periods and make them into more of a reloading period, I guess you could say. And so that sort of brings me to my point. I mentioned how Tobias Merriweather is a top-notch receiver. It's a top-notch receiving type of a player that Notre Dame hasn't gotten. And then the best part about it is that they went 2-3 days later, I don't know what it was, and added CJ Williams out of Mater Dei High School, Southern California, plus right out of Southern California, away from the Trojans, away from Stanford, away from all those Pac-12 schools that would have wanted him. And they really have, along with Amarion Walker, really solidified this 2022 recruiting class in terms of the wide receivers. And really the best way to look at it is that not only that, but Notre Dame also has a freshman group of receivers that are in their first camp right now, that when you put them together with these three and maybe more that they're going to add, and then you put them together with, the guys in the class of 2023, Notre Dame's really shaping up to have one heck of a wide receiving core. Again, I talked about when Notre Dame got the commitment from Tobias Merriweather, I used actually the hashtag close the gap. Okay. And Nathan, if Nathan's still listening on here, I don't know if he is or not. Nathan, I noticed that you used that hashtag today as well. So I really and truly believe, and I'm going to talk about, all this comes together here at the end, but I really truly believe that Notre Dame is at a point recruiting wise, both with the commitments of Tobias Merriweather and CJ Williams on the offensive side of the ball, and, the getting of guys like Jalen Sneed and other players. I don't have the whole recruiting class right off the top of my head. And I'm live right now, so it's also kind of evading me. But the way that they've been able to really up their game, they have the current number 2 recruiting class in the nation in the class of 2022. I'm dumbfounded right now, and I mean that in the best way possible. That Notre Dame really is, they're at a point where I'm not sure they've been before in terms of what they've got going on them, not just recruiting. And I'm going to talk about this here in a little bit, but Notre Dame right now knocking it out of the park on the recruiting trail. Tobias Merriweather, I made the comparison. He's a long guy. He reminds me a little bit of Justin Ross from Clemson, who, might live on in the nightmares of Notre Dame. In terms of his frame, his ability to go up and get the ball. CJ Williams is just a really polished kid, a guy that, I think can get on the field next year in South Bend. And so really the point, I guess, that I'm making about these receivers is that Notre Dame needs to develop them. I'm going to talk about developing things here in a little bit, and needs to keep them in the program. And not only that, these 3 freshmen that are in the program right now, especially, the top dog of that group, in my opinion, in Lorenzo Styles Jr., along with Dion and Jaden Thomas, those guys need to get meaningful reps so that then when we have, 6 freshman, sophomore receivers with all the talent in the world next year, we can hit the ground running, develop elite depth at that position. Because right now there's a position where you look at Notre Dame and say they don't have elite depth. It's the receiver position, without a doubt in my mind. Tight ends, elite depth. Right now, offensive line, maybe not elite depth, but you don't just lose 4 starters and then come back the next year with elite depth. But I'm not concerned about the guys on the offensive line in that room right now. And you could go on down, quarterbacks. Feel good about the quarterback position. I feel good about Jack Cohn, who we'll talk about here in a second, and then Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner moving forward. So the point, I guess, is that Notre Dame needs to shore up this wide receiver position. So if you get a guy nicked up, if you get a guy, who's off his game or whatever, you put in a younger guy, you don't skip a beat. That's the difference between a team like Notre Dame and a team like Alabama, Clemson, who can just plug and play. And Notre Dame is getting there, and they need to continue to get there. And part of that is going to have to do with, the development of those wide receivers. Moving on. Another bit of news from Notre Dame this week is that they named 7 captains. If I can find where I'm in my notes here. Those captains are Avery Davis, Kyle Hamilton, Kurt Heinisch, Jarrett Patterson, Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa, Drew White, and Kyron Williams. And so I don't have a lot to say about this, guys. It's just something that sort of, I don't know in the big grand scheme of things that this makes a whole bit of a difference, but I do want to say something about the captains. First of all, if you're not familiar with the story of Avery Davis, if you're not familiar with the story of Kyron Williams and how he was resilient after dropping a pass against Louisville late in the year during that just dreadful season. Familiarize with these guys, because when I saw that Notre Dame named these 7 captains, my first initial thought was, wow, 7 seems like a lot. I wasn't quite sure, because here's the thing. Going to Notre Dame, a privilege, okay? Being able to run out of the tunnel onto the football field as a football player of the Notre Dame football team, a privilege, okay? An absolute honor and a privilege. Getting to start, honor and a privilege. All of those things, getting to play every week in South Bend is a privilege. And for me, my initial thought was, man, what I need, what I want, my hope is that being a captain for the University of Notre Dame's football team is got to be the biggest, best privilege that anybody has ever had that's played Notre Dame football. And to me, it was kind of like, is 7 too much? Does 7 people water down that privilege? My initial thought was like, maybe, I don't know. But as I sort of started to think about it more, I thought to myself, well, that said, who in the world would I take out of this group? Okay. As a piggyback onto that, who else from the rest of the roster would I have added? I'm not really sure there's a name that screams, hey, I need to be added to this group. Usually you start to think back and that type of thing. But given where they're at with Jack Cohn and Drew Pine and those guys, probably quarterback wasn't, it wouldn't be authentic to say that Jack Cohn is a leader of this football team as of yet when you're naming captains. Is he going to lead? Absolutely. Is he going to have a very important leadership role now that he's been named the starter? Absolutely. However, I think in this particular case, 7 captains was appropriate. I don't think that's always the appropriate thing to do. However, when you go on down the line, one of the best players on the roster is Jarrett Patterson. No brainer. Kyron Williams, the way he is, the way he's an emotional leader for Notre Dame. No brainer. Kyle Hamilton, again, kind of in the same vein as Jarrett Patterson. No brainer. All right. Drew White. You can go on down the line. All of them, Kirk Heinisch back after a COVID year. No brainer. So all of these guys make sense, and I don't make, in this particular instance, I think 7 is just the appropriate number. That said, let's go win some football games with these 7 dudes. Before I move on to I just want to make sure, we've got people, coming in and out. We've had, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people throughout this live stream. And like I say, I appreciate you. If you're new here, this is the Under the Dome podcast. Make sure you're liking, commenting, following me on Twitter, finding us on YouTube. Obviously, if you're watching this, you found me somewhere. So, if you're interested in just the audio version, if, you can't sit here and listen to me ramble on for 18 minutes and 48 seconds or wherever I am at the moment, you find the audio version, listen to it in your car, subscribe that way. I've said time and time again that I want this particular podcast to be interactive. And so, like I say, I knew this first time that we did it, audience would be low, but we're going to continue to add on and do those types of things. So thanks for those of you that are here. Like I say, you're listening to the Under the Dome podcast. All right. So back to stuff, I guess you could say. The next very quick thing that I want to talk about before I kind of get to my little wrap up here and the bottom line and why all of these things that I'm talking about today are important is that the last, I guess, bit of information that came out of Notre Dame camp this week was that, the foregone conclusion that we all had that Jack Cohn was going to be named the starting quarterback has been solidified via Coach Kelly, via, Jack Cohn on Twitter, all of the social medias, Jack Cohn's the starter. Here's what I have to say about this. And again, if you follow me on Twitter, I've said this, might be sort of redundant. But, first of all, I guess I take issue to some of the things that are said on Twitter once in a while. It seems like there's a faction of people that really were into Ian Book, and Jack Cohn isn't as, I don't know, Jack Cohn isn't as mobile as Ian Book. He's not the same athlete. He doesn't do this thing. He's a 1-year type of a situation. I get that. There's another faction of people that think, oh my goodness, Ian Book can throw the ball down the field. Anybody besides Book could be a better quarterback for us. And, there's that faction of people. And then there's me that's kind of somewhere in the middle. Here's what I'll say about Jack Cohn. In the time that I've got to watch him, whether it was playing at Wisconsin and, just looking up some Jack Cohn things and seeing what people say about him and that type of stuff, this guy is going to be really good for Notre Dame. He's the perfect Notre Dame type of player, the type of quarterback that's going to be really good in South Bend. And I'm confident in saying that. I once in a while, because I'm a glutton for punishment, I bring up Notre Dame's all 22 film from when they lost to Alabama last season. And, early in that game, very first offensive play of the game, I believe, Ian Book looks left. I can't remember if it was Joe Wilkins. I can't remember if it was, I don't know who the receiver was. Lawrence Keys looks left, one-on-one coverage, could have thrown it to try to soften up the defense a little bit, doesn't, scrambles for a yard. Okay. The knock on Ian Book was that, obviously he was a little more careful with the football, threw high percentage passes, completed a high percentage of his passes, and, took care of the football and didn't make the big mistake. But that also means that he didn't necessarily push the ball down the field. I think Jack Cohn's going to be the guy that's going to take the ball and push it down the field. With Jack Cohn under center, that pass gets thrown. Whether it's complete or not, I don't know. But it's a low risk, high reward, defense softening type of a play that Notre Dame could have used, especially against an Alabama defense that was, and other defenses have done this, by the way, that was sitting on the short stuff and really had Notre Dame bottled up. We got a comment from Stymie Snurk. I love that, I'm assuming, nickname. Obviously, it's an ultimate team sport. I love, this is a really good point. It doesn't really matter who the quarterback is, and I think other Notre Dame outlets have said this. Jack Cohn at Notre Dame is going to have the best supporting cast that he has had, that he's been able to play with at any point in his career. Way better than anyone he played with at Wisconsin. So, as long as they have quality starts and they're handing it off to Kyron Williams and Chris Tyree and the offensive line gets it going and the receivers make plays, maybe I could be the quarterback. Probably not. But regardless, Jack Cohn, I love this. I love this. Hopefully he's not a cone head. Hopefully he's more of an ice cream cone. I don't know. Anyway, sorry, I'll stop with the puns. But that said, Jack Cohn, I'm saying it right now, I've looked at Notre Dame's schedule a million times. Although if you listen to the last podcast where I butchered it, you might think otherwise. I can't go through Notre Dame's schedule and pick out one specific game where I say Notre Dame's in trouble in this game. That said, could Notre Dame very well go 8-4 if things go poorly for them? Yes, absolutely. Could they go worse than that? Obviously. But I can't look through Notre Dame's schedule and say they're outmatched on paper against any team that they play. Now, certainly when playing a stretch of 5 games where 4 of them are ranked in the top 15 and multiple of them have multiple weeks to prepare, yes, obviously Notre Dame is going to have their difficulties. But if you, in a vacuum, look at each one of these individual games and on paper, Notre Dame out talents and out X's and O's anybody that's on that schedule with Jack Cohn. Okay. And Jack Cohn can win us these games. If anything, and I'll leave I'll end the Jack Cohn discussion with this. If Notre Dame didn't think that they could win every game they played in this year, would they have named Jack Cohn the quarterback? I think the answer is a very clear no. Okay, so if anything, and I haven't seen a whole lot of people that are upset with Jack Cohn being named the quarterback. I'm just looking at it from a little bit of a different standpoint. Obviously, Notre Dame is in win now mode, and that's very, very clear. And Notre Dame fans should love that, okay, because Jack Cohn is your win now quarterback, without a doubt. So we'll put a pin in that for the time being. Certainly, there will be much more to talk about as Jack Cohn, begins his actual career here at Notre Dame. But I want to kind of get to the wrap up and the last part of this conversation. Okay, and that's the bottom line. Okay, and before I get to that, I've put a little call-in number on the screen. If by the time I wrap up my thoughts here in a couple seconds, if you want to hit that call-in number, it's 740-402-2021. Right now, you'll go straight to voicemail. I'm not going to take a live call right now unless I'm feeling real dangerous here in a couple minutes. But if you've got a voicemail that you want to leave, you have something that you want to say, you want to hear your voice on the Under the Dome podcast, go ahead and hit that line real quick. You'll get the opportunity to, have your voicemail. And, if I get it before we're here, we'll play it. And if not, it'll just get played on the next podcast. So all the reason for you to come back for the next show. So again, that number 740-402-2021. Like I say, you are listening to the Under the Dome podcast. One of the first live shows. And like I say, we've had, a few people in and out. A couple people have commented. Thanks for listening to us. We really appreciate it. Make sure that, you're checking out those audio only ones as well. If, this live thing, if you can't make the commitment to sit down and watch this live show, make sure that you're getting to Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, all of those places so that you can, catch this, the audio version of this show when it's more convenient for you. So lastly, here's why this all matters. Okay. So we've talked about, Tobias Merriweather, the captains, Jack Cohn, everything in between. And here's kind of, why this all matters. Okay. To run a good football program, okay, to have the characteristics of a good football program, you have to have a lot of things go right. Okay. And I've really narrowed this down. I thought about this, how many components to this there really are. And really, you could make the argument that there's more or fewer or whatever you want to say. But to me, that there's about 4 components, maybe 5 if you really broke it down, having a good football program. And as I think about Notre Dame and where, which of these check boxes Notre Dame, particularly is strong, my thought process is this. First of all, to have a good football program, you have to be good in recruiting. Okay. Doesn't matter. There's the old coaching phrase, Jimmys and Joes are more important than X's and O's. And, your personnel, having good players solves a lot of ills. Okay. That's fairly obvious. So you have to be good in recruiting. You have to have good athletes. Okay. The second part is that once you get those athletes on campus, you have to develop the players that you recruit. Fairly obvious. Okay. If CJ Williams and Tobias Merriweather, never get any better than they are right now, they're not going to be very good football players at Notre Dame. They might be okay football players. And maybe, I could be proven wrong on that. But if they don't get any better, I'm going to just go out on a limb and say, they're not going to be very good football players for Notre Dame if they don't improve. And I think, if you ask them, if you ask any of the members of the coaching staff, they'd say something similar. Okay. So you have to be able to, those players. Okay. Third one is that you have to have a culture in place that allows all of that to happen. Because if you don't have the buy-in, you don't have accountability, and you don't have all of those things, we can talk about all the buzzwords that you want, you're not going to have a good football program. All of the good players in the world, all of the, great development in the world, if it doesn't come together and you have guys playing for each other and you have 11 individuals out there instead of one unit, not going to be a very good football team. And then finally, the fourth one is you have to have a coach and a coaching staff who, oversees all this, has the right scheme, the X's and O's, is willing to adapt, and all of that to the players that you have. Okay. And so really, to have a great football team, you have to have kind of I don't know if a marriage is the right word because they're just named 4 components, but you have to have a blending of all of those components to be elite. And when you look back over the 12 years of the Brian Kelly era, I think it's safe to say that there's been different times where, some of these boxes are very emphatically checked and some of them not so much. For instance, I think Brian Kelly's been, generally a very good X's and O's coach through his time. He wouldn't have been, and I would say that that's probably his strong suit, was at least when he came to Notre Dame, was the X's and O's, although, others might debate me on that. That's okay. Player development wasn't always the best, wasn't always the worst, wasn't always the best. Recruiting hasn't always been the best, wasn't always the worst, wasn't always the best. Based off of, and I think to the Malik Zaire, Deshaun Kaiser situation that started 2016 and some of the stories that we heard about that particular thing, the culture hasn't been the best either. Okay. And so there's been issues with this Notre Dame football program, and I'm not here to discuss those issues. Okay. Those issues are very real. Okay. To a certain degree, unacceptable. Okay. But right now, if you take those 4 components, can you find or think of a time in Brian Kelly's tenure where any of those 4 components, recruiting, development, culture, or X's and O's, was better than it is right now? In my particular opinion, is that in those 4 components, where every single one of them is better than when Brian Kelly took over 2010. Okay, we're in year 12 now of the Brian Kelly experience. Year 11, I don't know, whatever. And so 12, I was right. So I still see on Twitter once in a while that Brian Kelly is maxed out and this and that and everything else. Not true. Okay. All Brian Kelly has done since 2016, after, wipe the slate clean. We've seen some of the best recruiting in the last year or so on both sides of the ball. Probably the thing that I've felt best about is Notre Dame development over the past couple of years. I mean, I think, Chase Claypool, a guy like that, is, the poster child for this, in saying that, he clearly developed Miles Boykin too, clearly developed over 4 years at Notre Dame, and is now a very good NFL wide receiver because of the development at Notre Dame. Okay. Mike Elston continues to, every kid that gets under Mike Elston, seems to reach his full potential. Notre Dame has a ton of defensive linemen in the NFL right now. Jeff Quinn has stepped in, done a great job with the offensive line. Del Alexander, you can kind of, I don't know, you can make your opinions about, and I think some of those opinions are fair. However, the recruiting's been good, and if I think Notre Dame has set up this particular year to be very good at wide receiver. I think all of these things are true. Brian Polian, Lance Taylor, and, of course, Tommy Rees. And, of course, everybody knows about, Mark Freeman and the impact that he's made, especially on the recruiting trail since he's been here. So, can you, and if you're listening, if you're whatever, if you listen back to this and you want to leave me a voicemail and we can start the next podcast with this, can you think of a time when Notre Dame was better in any one of those areas, recruiting, development, culture, or what was the last one? Or X's and O's, than they are right now? And I'm just talking about the Brian Kelly era. Okay. Over the course of the last 12 years, certainly you can make the argument that, Lou Holtz, culture, A1, okay. Development, all of that, A1. Okay. We're not talking about that. Notre Dame, by and large, by far, isn't the best part. And so the bottom line of all of this, as I kind of wrap up this thought, is that Notre Dame's in the best spot. And what that means, at least in my opinion, is that expectations for Notre Dame now need to be higher. Okay. And Notre Dame needs to reach those expectations, and they need to raise the bar. Okay. And I think they're doing that. I'm not here to say that this isn't happening, but I think the floor now is 10 wins. 10 wins, New Year's Six Bowl every single year for Notre Dame, especially if what you're doing is nailing the recruiting and nailing the development absolutely, bar none, Notre Dame has top 5 talent in the country in any football team. Put it together, win football games. Go on the road, win football games. Okay? Win the games against Georgia. Okay? Win a New Year's Six Bowl. Win a college football playoff game. Get to a national championship. Win a national championship. That the bar needs to be higher now. And I don't know. I can't say that emphatically enough. That's where Notre Dame is. That's where Notre Dame needs to be. And to give one more, I guess, ringing endorsement of Brian Kelly as I say this, because I don't want people to listen to what I'm saying and think that I'm saying that if Brian can't do this, then he's the guy that's got to go. I don't really envision this as a Brian Kelly thing exclusively. Okay. This is a collective. Okay. And I don't think that one person, that another person other than Brian Kelly is, the fix if this doesn't exactly happen. But, there needs to be a collective no. Okay. It doesn't just cut it to say graduating champions. Okay. And like I say, and I got away from this for a second, the ringing endorsement of Brian Kelly is, at the end of the day, what Notre Dame football, when the higher ups at Notre Dame meet and they evaluate Brian Kelly at the end of the year, what they should say, he develops young men, he treats everyone well, and those types of things. And really winning a championship isn't the end all be all of a sports program, because, life is bigger than sports. I get that. And Brian hit the nail on the head. So I don't want this to turn into Ben saying that, if Notre Dame doesn't win a championship in the next year or two, that's just blow it all up. Okay. What I'm saying is that this is where the next step needs to happen. The development needs to happen. Lorenzo Styles needs to be on the field at some point this year. Deion Colesy needs to be on the field in meaningful snaps. Okay. And we need to see all 4 of these things not just be the best that they've been under Brian Kelly, but gel and come all together at the same time, and just be, I don't know. It just needs to come together, and Notre Dame needs to get the monkey off its back in terms of winning one of these stinking games where it really, really matters. They've certainly had a few marquee wins over the years. I'm not taking away from that. They've more than respectable. Okay. I'm not saying that they haven't been, but Notre Dame needs to take the next step. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of just, we can't be satisfied is what I'm saying. So I'll leave you with that. Obviously there's, if you've stuck around, if you've been in and out and you've listened, thank you for listening. Listeners that have listened to the audio, make sure you join us the next time to kind of have this live opportunity. If you want to leave a voicemail, and that kind of reminds me that I need to check to see if I got any voicemails. I don't think I did. If you want to leave a voicemail for the next podcast, there's a way that I will leave the link in the description of the YouTube channel for you to do that. You can click on it. You can leave it from your computer or your iPhone or whatever device you want to use. Or you can simply go to a number, dial 740-402-2021. Okay, if I said something that you want to chime in on, you want to hear your voice, dial in that number. Like I say, that's not my real number. Okay, so you can call me at 3 a.m. It's not going to be up. And I will play that voicemail provided that it is appropriate to play on the airwaves. Okay, so again, I've said this a bunch of times over the last couple of days. As I have gotten ready for this podcast, I've said this on other podcasts since I've kind of made that return after, not really recording during the pandemic. My goal is that this podcast becomes very interactive, and, you got to start somewhere. I pretty well knew that that this first one would not be the best attended, but consistency will bring more people. And so tell your friends, follow on social media, subscribe to the notifications. You guys are smart. Okay. Get the notifications so that you know that when we're live. And And obviously, if you go to my Twitter, my Facebook, Instagram, all of those places, you will get notified that, there's a time where we're live. Hopefully the stream held together. I haven't heard anybody say that the stream was bad. But I guess I'll see. So at any rate, subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, all of that type of stuff. Go where you need to go on YouTube and all of that type of stuff to get notified for when we go live, whether that's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all of those places. And like I say, I want the interaction. So if you think I'm an idiot and I said something dumb, let me know, because frankly, like last time, I said something dumb. So thanks for listening. Like I say, my goal is to have fun with this, to make it very interactive. We're going to do this a lot. This live stream thing is, obviously something that I've been working on, trying to perfect. This one went relatively well in terms of a production standpoint, at least I think. And I'm just excited for some of the fun stuff that we're going to be able to do. Again, like I say, if you're new here, this was the Under the Dome podcast. Thanks for everything. Thanks for listening. Let me know what you think and all of that jazz. And, as I always say to end the cast, until next time, go Irish.